to have you with us in this edition of the Urban Debate here tonight at 9 p.m. One more time, viewers, we're going to put the spotlight on the India-China standoff. For the first time in 45 years, we are told that there's firing that took place along the line of actual control for the first time in 45 years. Now, here is what happened. Last evening, we are told that it's the Chinese troops, the Chinese army that tried to move towards the Mukhpari peak, towards our side, moving in very close to where we stand and what we actually have under our control. They opened fire in that area. This is in the Chushul area. This is where the Indian army showed its resistance, but the Indian army says that we did not fire. We followed all the protocol and all the norms. Suffice to say, once again, in this area, things are extremely tense. As we speak, for the past 5 months, there has been a massive build-up along the LAC, especially in the Ladakh sector, in the eastern sector, and it's only worsening day after day. Despite our attempts to hold talks at various levels, from the army level to the government level, the diplomatic level, at various points, we have held conversations with China. In fact, I want to take you through those details as we once again stare at China right across the LAC and stare at a tense situation. Here is what has happened. On June 17, there was a conversation between the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, and the Chinese Foreign Minister. On June 24, there was a joint secretary level meeting that took place. In fact, after that, on July 5th, there was dialogue between NSLG Doval and a Chinese representative. On July 10th, joint secretary level meeting took place. On July 24th, was a joint secretary level meeting that took place again. On August 20th, again, there was a meeting between the bureaucrats of the two sides. And just a few days ago, as late as September 5th, Mr. Rajnath Singh and the Chinese Defense Minister held a meeting, a conversation with a large delegation in Moscow. In just 2 days from now, our External Affairs Minister is set to meet his Chinese counterpart again at the SCO summit. Despite these meetings, despite the general level meetings, the brigadier level conversations, China seems to be provoking us again and again, and there is no let-up in the kind of build-up we've seen in this zone. So what's going wrong? Does India need to drastically alter its strategy? What should we be looking at? I have some very basic questions that I want to ask our experts, and we've got a power-packed panel tonight. Very reputed experts joining us tonight. Are we headed towards an armed conflict of any kind with China? That's the first question that comes to everybody's mind. After multiple failed attempts at resolution via talks, can China really be trusted with anything right now? Why is it that China is repeatedly provoking its neighbors? And it's not just about India, but that's what they're doing with multiple neighbors. Can the international community really be roped in to pressurize and to rein in China? Some of the questions we have. Without wasting any time, let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining us right now. General VP Malik, former Indian Army Chief, with us this evening. Always good to have him on the panel. Maroof Raza, strategic affairs expert and consulting editor to the Times Network. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, official spokesperson of our Foreign Office and Consul General to Shanghai at one point. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this conversation. But first up, I just want to very quickly go across to our senior editor of Economic Times, Manu Pubby, is with me. Manu, let's begin with explaining to our viewers what is the current situation, what do we know right now, especially in the Chushul area where this firing took place.
See, as you said, first time in 45 years we've seen firing. What basically happened is that in the south bank of Pengong, so which is the Chushul area, the Indian Army moved last week to capture key heights and strategic peaks. Since then, the Chinese have been trying to push us back. In this particular incident which happened late in the evening yesterday, about 40 to 50 Chinese soldiers armed not just with carbines and guns, but with long rods tipped off with machetes, basically like a medieval spears, they tried to come towards our. At the point which they tried to enter the barbed wire defensive post, I think to go back, and I think warning shots were fired. So uh, beyond the past, we were seeing in Galwan, there've been fisticuffs, there have been pushing, shoving, stone throwing. We've seen a firing incident, an attempt by the Chinese to occupy, which is a forward location of the Indian Army. Very serious thing. This could have gone either way. It's a miracle no one died. It's a miracle this didn't extend down to a full-fledged gunfight. And I think the Indian Army's concern now is that these guys are sitting right in front of them. So the PLA has made a position about 150 meters location there, and they have just set up camp in a very intense face-off. So the concern is now that if this incident happens in other areas in the Chushul area, in the Chushul sector itself, this could lead to some escalation beyond what we've seen in the past, which has been a bit of bumps, a bit of dhakka mukki or stone pelting. This has now gone to the next level. And I think the Indian Army is pretty certain that they will not be involved in a fisticuff or a stone fight kind of situation. Any provocation will be met with a professional army-like response, and this is all definitely an escalation in tensions on the border for sure.
Yes, in fact, the pictures that we've seen that have emerged there from there shows that even the Chinese clearly are prepared for any kind of fight, stone pelting, fist fight. The weapons that they're holding, it just shows you they've come with a different kind of a mindset right now. General Malik, what is your own sense about the build-up that's happened and the situation in Chushul right now?
Tanvi, thank you for getting me on the panel. I think we need to just go over the situation since April, when the Chinese, with their activities, they have, really speaking, thrown all the CBM that had been worked out since 1993, as well as all the norms of the LAC, how to work on that, how to these SOPs that we had worked out, all those have been now thrown to the winds because of their activities. Now that they have occupied various positions which were earlier disputed, whether it is the Fingers area, certain areas in Jetsang, and even in south of Pangang So, in these areas, the Indians have reacted. For the first time, they have taken a proactive defensive stance along the line of actual control and occupied these heights. The situation is tense. As Manu correctly said, these old SOPs of not firing at each other, are not coming into contact or something, those are all now gone to wings. And we may have a situation of the kind that we faced in 1967 in Nathula area, where they came very close to each other and trying to push each other, and somebody started firing, and that firing escalated into an artillery duel for almost 4 or 5 days thereafter. There were heavy casualties on the Chinese side. We also suffered, but they suffered. So there is a situation which is, I would consider it very tense, very provocative of the kind of activity that they have indulged in now. And it's a kind of a razor's edge situation. And we have to be prepared for escalation. And if escalation takes place, it can go out of control unless we are very, very patient in controlling the escalation. But situation is tense and it's on the razor's edge.
Maroof, would you like to also come in here? The situation is tense. Yes, it has been now for several weeks. There's been no let-up at all. We just had a face-off a few days ago in another area. And this time it's in Chushul. What's your own sense of the ground situation right now?
Who's this question for? Sorry. Tanvi, is this question for me?
Maroof to you, Maroof Raza.
Oh, Yes, good evening. With great respect for General Malik that I've always had, and for Manu's analysis, I'm going to say a few things which are going to shake the basic stance and the flow of the argument. The first thing is, I'm glad we've gone to this stage where we are willing to fire back at them, because for too long we've lived with this nonsensical myth that we can get diplomatic dialogue to solve everything with China. This was a boast of Krishna Menon in the 60s. We saw what we had on our hands, the humiliation. And it has since been basically in the prerogative of the Ministry of External Affairs to try and get something out of China. But 22 rounds of official talks post 1993 and several other engagements, even now, more recently, have led us nowhere. Why? Because China's President Xi Jinping and his core advisory group are now convinced that they have the ability to keep needling India and stay their ground as long as they hold firm, and they can counter any American threats from the high seas. But what China's leadership has been a bit delusional about, and the Indian army knows that only too well, that the Chinese military has a lot of weaknesses. The first is their soldiers don't like to die. Our soldiers don't mind dying. As we've seen more recently, General Malik might contradict me because he is the elder in this business. But let me tell you, the Chinese have a one-child policy, which means that if that man dies, then nobody's going to look after the family. Two, Chinese veterans have been very unhappy with the shabby treatment the Chinese state have meted out to them. And this is trickling down to the ranks, that if anything happens to you, nobody's going to take care of you, or if you're crippled as a veteran. The third point to understand is that what are weapons, personal weapons, for if you can't use them when somebody's coming at you today with a spear and yesterday with all sorts of handmade weapons with nails on them? It's about time you fire back and draw the line as far as the Chinese are concerned. And I'm glad our troops have done that. And let me tell you, please understand an essential of conflicts. Just because you deploy troops, just because you respond in defense in a level of capability that you have, doesn't mean you're going to war. War doesn't happen overnight. There are many stages of a conflict that escalates. So deployment and show of force is a deterrent element, just like nuclear weapons. Having it in your arsenal works as a deterrent. And finally, and most importantly, what I am very happy about is that India and the government now appears to be abandoning the old myth that seemed to be a shadow in South Bloc. That means that everything will go back to honky-dory when the foreign ministers meet, or even the prime minister meets as with the head of their government. It is not going to be that way, Tanvi, because the Chinese want that territory. They have had separate claim lines there. There are 3, if not 4 claim lines, and they go by them wherever they can lay access to, from the Johnson line, which India claims, to the McCartney line, which the Chinese were early claiming, to the 1962 line, and now the post-1993 line, which has come to be known as the LAC, the so-called green line on the maps. And let me tell you that we have the capability, I'd like to be contradicted on this, but we have the capability to do to China a little more than what they've done to us if the political go-ahead is given. And I believe the Prime Minister's office has left this to the commanders on the ground. And if that be the case, China is in for many, many shocks with what the Indian army can do to them, despite the brandishing that they've been doing and doing all the public relations exercise. Thank you.
Okay, let me just ask General Malik if he wants to come in on this before I go to our other panelists. General Malik, if diplomatic conversations is not the only way out, there has to be certain amount of dealing on ground by the army. How do you foresee that?
Look, I think partly I agree with Maroof the way he has mentioned. The troops on the ground are firmly in position and they are capable of taking on the Chinese if there are any more skirmishes or they try to do anything. I think we have got adequate strength to take them on. And I have no doubt about the bravery of our troops, their capability in terms of both professional as well as in terms of patriotism. They are in a good position. We have today the required logistics also, and there is no doubt that the national policy, as far as the military is concerned, it has definitely turned into a little more proactive defensive policy. I wouldn't call it offensive, but proactive defensive policy. But having said all that, I'm not too sure whether both countries are keen. At least, I mean, I can say, a war is never in our interest. As far as possible, one would like to avoid the war. But if it comes to the, as they say, if the pressure is put on us and we have to go into a war situation, I have no doubt that the people will take them on. But if it is possible, one should like to avoid a war. It is not in our interest. I think it's neither in the interest of Chinese. So therefore, while we stand firm on the ground, which we are today, we should try and avoid a war if possible. And that can only come about with negotiations, with talking to people. And you said, Tanvi, correctly, that so far these negotiations haven't worked. I don't believe that the military diplomacy is going to work. We have seen so many meetings that have taken place. So one has to wait for the political level meetings, starting with the foreign ministers who will be meeting his counterpart in the next 2 days. From there onwards to see what is Chinese attitude, whether they want to de-escalate or they want to carry on with the China dream kind of a policy, which President Xi Jinping has narrated to his troops. So we'll have to watch that. Until that time, we will stand firm on the ground and try and avoid going to a war. But as I said, if they escalate, if they try to escalate from the other side, well, we will take them on.
So let's fair enough. So how do we tackle this? One, like General Malik says, the conversations that have to happen at a government senior level with the ministers now meeting, we need to see where China stands, what's going on in their mind. Two, like Maroof says, we need to be open and we should be giving tougher responses on the ground with our forces. Let me just read out what the official statement has been from our side today about this fighting that's taken place for the first time in 45 years. India, while it is committed to disengagement and de-escalating the situation, China continues to undertake provocative activities. At no stage has the Indian Army transgressed across the LAC or resorted to any kind of aggressive means, including fighting. So that's us denying that we resorted to any kind of fighting, which is what China initially claimed and accused us of. It is the PLA that has been blatantly violating agreements, carrying out aggressive maneuvers, while engagement at military, diplomatic and political level is in progress. In the instant case on 7 September, PLA troops who were attempting to close in one of our forward positions, when dissuaded by our own troops, the PLA troops then fired a few rounds in the air in an attempt to intimidate us, our own troops. So I guess the question that becomes Ambassador Vishnu Prakash is, what do we do next then? How do we handle this? China simply wants to constantly poke and provoke, maybe nothing more and nothing less. But how long does this continue?
Valid questions. First of all, I would like to say that I generally agree with what General Malik has to say. As a soldier, he appreciates the complexities, the dangers, the upsides and the downsides. There's a very big difference between a general soldier or a general and an armchair general. So that comes out very clearly. I would also like to thank my good friend Maroof Raza for the confidence that he has in the South Bloc and the accolades that he has showered. I mean, I think that Indian diplomats or diplomacy is not as naive as he makes out to be, but that aside, we are very clear, Tanvi, that diplomacy is just a part of the whole. No, in no country can diplomacy function on its own, and the military power, the political power, the economic power, and diplomacy go all hand in hand. We have been a votary of a dialogue. We have generally managed to solve problems, but it is very clear that for a dialogue to be effective, one has to have the ability of bringing in coercive power if required. And I agree with my panelists on that front. Now, let's also face it, China, the big difference between China and India is that China, under Xi Jinping in particular, believes in comprehensive national power. And they look at the power asymmetry, one. Two, they have gotten away hitherto with doing things their way, violating international norms, agreements. Case in point is South China Sea. And now they have been needling India. In fact, since 2013, the relationship has effectively gone downhill. Now, and I have served in China, I follow this region very carefully. To my mind, China is determined to embarrass India because they see that in the next 10, 15 years, we could become a power that could be a countervailing power. So that is the bottom line. And they are trying to needle India, that's for sure. They are trying to provoke a conflict, it so looks like. And I think the posture that we have adopted is the right one. I completely agree with General Malik that we do not want a conflict, that we are destined by history to live side by side, by geography to live side by side. But if push comes to shove, we are capable of inflicting a cost. And I think that we are on the right path. We are progressively taking economic measures, military measures. We are trying to bring about an international pressure. But we are dealing, we are very clear that we are dealing with a state which does not abide by any rules, any norms. We are trying to work out, bring about a modus vivendi, but we are prepared for escalation if required.
Right. Okay, so now I know Maroof wants to come in, but very quickly, let me ask you this then, Ambassador Prakash. How do you deal, with a side that's not really interested in having a dialogue, claims to, but on the other hand, comes at you with spears or stones or guns? Now, how do you have a dialogue with this kind of a side? What is the diplomatic way to handle it?
Very true, Tanvi. But if we do not talk, that means that, there's a saying that where dialogue ends, conflict begins. So the effort is, and again, I agree with General Malik that even today, I believe that it is not in China's interest also, as it is not in India's interest to have conflict. There's always an effort to try and sort out. I'm hoping, although I am not very confident, that the two foreign ministers will be able to push things in a way that they can see good reason. So you cannot fault India for trying. And that is how the civilized world conducts its business, because it's very easy to, take out sticks and guns and start beating each other. But I thought we left that behind about 2,000 years ago, or at least 1,000 years ago. So that is the preferred option. But as I said, we are no pushover, and we are capable of defending ourselves. Yet the effort was and will remain to find a modus vivendi if possible.
All right. Maroof, go ahead, please. You wanted to make a point.
You see, Tanvi, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash is a seasoned diplomat, and he's spoken like one. But the fact of the matter is that it's not that I don't have confidence in our diplomats. Some of my very dear friends are senior and retired diplomats, and I have great respect for their intellect. But the fact of the matter is, you're dealing with a country that doesn't have respect for the way you go about your diplomatic business. And therefore, you have to be prepared to respond in a way that that country will respect you for. Let me give you a couple of examples. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash brings out the South China Sea example, where the Chinese have been muscle flexing for years. They have thrown into the dustbin every other ruling that has come from The Hague, the international courts. The UNCLOS, the United Nations, laws for movement in the high seas, they don't respect that. They have taken over territories because they marked out a 9-dash line, which they claim was Chinese territory 223 BC onwards. And suddenly, they're not willing to accept the 1913-1914 Shimla meeting conference, where we came close to agreeing on a border. Only the Chinese representative there, while he didn't sign the agreement totally, he initialed it because Lord Curzon and Henry McMahon prevailed on him. The fact of the matter is, whatever diplomacy you do, I have no problem with it. That is the job diplomats are best at. But get on with it and give us something to go further ahead with, and don't come back every time with half your time being spent on trying to get to know Beijing better than the residents of Beijing. The second point I wish to make is that every time China has made intrusions or attempted to make incursions, we have tried to signal to them by making our soldiers cannon fodder, by putting them up front. We are only talking about the deaths now. Do you know, and General Malik will bear me out, he's also a veteran of the 62 conflict, that many soldiers have been severely wounded just by bayoneting by the Chinese in patrols when they come across each other's path. And finally, and most importantly, I don't disagree with General Malik. I don't disagree with Ambassador Prakash. I don't disagree with Manu. But I wish that we can finally identify that what is a threshold of getting pushed around by the Chinese. I think we are reaching that threshold. And I have said so earlier, conflicts don't start just because one shot is fired. General Malik knows that in the case of Kargil, he brought us victory. But you need to have very clearly defined rules of engagement that South Bloc and the PMO has to tell the armed forces that, okay, this is what you are allowed to do, and this is what we will not allow you to do. So there can be a certain containment even when tensions are high. And finally, and most importantly, let me tell you, China is in no mood to withdraw. I don't buy any of this argument that the foreign ministers or the Raksha Mantris are going to get them to withdraw. The winter is going to hurt them very badly. They are less prepared for the winter on those heights along the LOC and the LAC, than our troops are. And though we've rushed in more units and formations, our guys are better acclimatized, and there is a better degree of bearing up with high altitude than the Chinese can. Their lines are stretched, and they are just trying to see who's going to blink first. If we don't blink first, we won the game.
I do want to talk about what happens next because, once the winters set in, things are going to get extremely difficult in that kind of a terrain. Not something that any side would want to make the troops go through it. Of course, our army and our troops are extremely strong and well used to it. But that being said, before I go across to General Malik on that, Manu, you wanted to come in. Go ahead, please.
The point about negotiations and diplomatic talk and military action on the ground, they have to go together. The reason that, I believe the defense minister was not meeting his Chinese counterpart twice, he met him on the third attempt, is that we didn't have any cards on the table to negotiate with. So the army's actions of, taking up key positions, taking up those strategic heights, has given India a card to play. Before that, all talks were centered around us requesting the Chinese to move back from locations where they come forward. So the military the military action has opened up a front, possibly a negotiating tool to go ahead and resolve it. It's not. I'm not saying it's going to work, but it's at least something on the table. Your point on prolonged deployment and how difficult it is for troops. Remember, so many troops, there are about 40,000 Indian troops there, deployed over months. Casualties come even in non-operational roles. We've already lost 5 soldiers in accidents in this area in the past 3 months. Or Parakram, we lost more than 500 people when we never went to war. So yes, it does come at a cost, but that cost has to be borne out with the benefits or the reason for being there. And the best case scenario, of course, is that quickly this things gets resolved, that our hard stance that we have showed to the Chinese, it gets recognized, and the foreign minister level talks somehow managed to work out. But yes, it was important for us to show our hard stand. I'm glad the army did that, and I'm sure it will continue to do that on the LSE.
Okay, so General Malik, then the question that I was, referring to earlier, what happens next? The amount of build-up that's taken place already, and frankly, when in the month of May we were all here having the conversation when this build-up had just started, we did say, and all of you experts said, that it will take 5 to 6 months at least, for even if disengagement process starts in the next couple of weeks, for us to come back to normal. That's not happened. We've not even moved an inch. In fact, it's only worsened. And both sides have only deployed additional troops. What happens when the winters hit in that difficult terrain? How will we manage?
Tanvi, firstly, let me say that categorically that our troops are today well trained and well equipped for winter. It is going to be a long haul, even if there are some kind of negotiations. I think we are quite prepared for it, and we will have to face that. The second point, as far as winter readiness is concerned, while the Chinese may not be as fit and as well equipped as we are today, but I would not like to underestimate. I don't think it is correct for us to start underestimating our adversary. We have to go with this. They can also fight like we are capable of doing that. Second point I want to make is that there is definitely a change in the proactive stance of our government. There has been a policy change, which one has noticed from the time when we crossed the line of control for surgical strike, and then we went for Balakot. And this time also, when the Prime Minister went to Ladakh, he did say that, look, the blood of people who have been martyred in Galwan Valley will not go waste. So that was a kind of a warning, a threat. And I'm so glad that Army has now been told to carry out the action which they did on 28, 29. And I believe that now they have been given much greater freedom of these kind of proactive defensive stances than we were given in my time, if I can use that, or earlier. Having said that, while we are prepared to fight during the winter also, I will not like to say that we should close our doors as far as negotiations are concerned. Maroof is definitely a little more pessimistic, going on the past experiences, but if we have strong defense, I think that enables successful diplomacy, and let the diplomats also feel that yes, we have strong defense. And if we follow that line of having strong defense, I think it may enable the diplomacy also to succeed. So let's follow this particular norm, that continue to have strong defense, a proactive defensive posture, taking on the Chinese if they want to take you on, and let the door remain open as far as negotiations are concerned.
Okay, fair enough. Before I go back to Ambassador Prakash, let me actually go back to Manu, Pubby, to the point that General Malik made on the additional freedom, or much more freedom that the troops have today, Manu, to respond on ground to judge the situation and handle it appropriately than perhaps they did 20, 30 years ago. And we've seen that, in the recent face-offs that have happened. If you can shed some more light on what you've learned and how it's been dealt with on ground by the Indian Army every time China has tried to come in or provoke us.
General Murray is totally right that the government has changed its stance. It's taken a much more harder line on defense, and there's more freedom on the ground. On the China thing, I think initially it took us by surprise. The first time, when the clash happened, and the first two times it happened, I think it took the government a bit by surprise. But once it was clear the Chinese, were coming out to attacks with a murderous intent, I think a whole new set of rules were set up for soldiers. And those new SOPs are the ones which have been put to use yesterday when they tried to come in and take advanced positions. And this basically gives military commanders on the ground much more authority to move around troops, to carry out defensive maneuvers, to carry weapons to whatever extent they want to, and even respond at times without waiting for orders from higher up. And I would say that there was an initial bit of confusion as far as this particular incident is concerned with China. But broadly, we have seen the more muscular response of the forces. The very simple example is the Air Force. If you see the past 3-4 months, the Air Forces attack helicopters, their fighter jets, their transport aircraft. They're very visible to you, visuals everywhere, which means that there is no hiding anymore that we have military capability. We do have cutting-edge military capability. We want to show it. We want to use it as a weapon for peace. And I think that's the stand that has been a huge change from the past, when it was all about keeping quiet, not talking about things. I think that freedom is also very visible to commanders on the ground.
Okay. The other aspect that I wanted to cover was handling this diplomatically, or in other ways. Ambassador Prakash, we also spoke a few months ago about economically taking on China. We've taken several steps in that regard, cutting them off. Many of the deals that we had have been scrapped or put on hold, put in cold storage. We've changed the rules of engagement, and that process really continues as we speak on the economic front. What else can be explored? Can we look at building a larger international, support system to pressurize China? Does that really work with China?
I think we will have to go all in and use all options that are available to us. You have already covered the economic side, so I won't talk of that. The international pressure will help. To what extent it will work, I do not know, because there's one very big difference, Tanvi. In 2008, when we got the NSG waiver, China was a little apprehensive, wary of being the last man standing. Today, they have adopted a much more muscular policy, and the wolf warrior diplomacy that they're engaging in is a double-edged sword. They think they are intimidating countries, but it will come to harass them. It will come to haunt them. Now, also there's a fact, let me be realistic. Most of the countries find it difficult to choose between India and China, and they will not be so eager to take sides. But there are countries, especially USA, France, Japan, Australia, and hopefully there will be other countries who are willing to call a spade a spade. And my take is that if like-minded countries come together, which is happening for the simple reason that China has opened up too many fronts. It has taken on almost all its neighbors, Japan, Australia, Canada, USA, Vietnam, Philippines, even trying to grab land of Bhutan. So there is a pushback against China. And if the like-minded countries start speaking in one voice, for example, even if when it came to, let's say, banning an app, one country doing that is different, but suppose it had been a group decision, the impact would have been much more. So I think that will help. At the same time, there are two brief comments I would like to make here. One is that when it comes to China, they like playing the waiting game. And we should show no hurry to arrive at a solution, because they feel that if you're showing hurry, that means you are at a weak wicket. Let's remember that Somdorangchu incident lasted 6 years. I don't think there's a parallel, but with China, when it comes to that, one has to play the long game. And lastly, I agree with my co-panelists that the proactive engagement that we are now following, we may not know what all is going on, but for example, about a week ago, it was disclosed that after the 15th, 16th June incident, we activated our naval assets. We sent one of our warships to South China Sea near Malacca Straits, and then the positions that we have been since taking. I think that's the best way to deal with China, because China, if one language they understand, it's the language of power. And if we are able to convey that, look, there are going to be costs, perhaps there'll be a rethink on their part.
Well, very quickly, Maroof, would you want to come in this as well? We've had conversations about, a few of the other tactics that India could look at using against China. But 5 months on, what do you think we can do?
Well, I've myself been talking about, I've written about it, I've done TV shows on this, that if you want to ease pressure on yourself on the Himalayan front, use your maritime assets to put pressure on China on their jugular vein, which is the Straits of Malacca, because the bulk of their oil and trade lines pass through that. You just make it difficult for them and convey a message either directly by looking at them in the eye or diplomatically, as Ambassador Vishnu has been suggesting, by saying that, listen, friend, you pull out from there, we pull out from here. QED. Now, let me also bring out 3 or 4 quick points, Tanvi. First is that in 1962, which China keeps harping upon, that they could teach us another lesson like that, the entire Nehru administration and many senior generals allowed themselves to be browbeaten by Nehru and Krishna Menon into not standing up to the possibility of a Chinese attack. And it was a complete belief through the 50s that China won't attack us. And when it did, and some of our posts fell like 9 pins, people like General Kaul and others ran back to Delhi in shocked disbelief and got admitted in hospital. In 1967, at Nathula, which General Malik has mentioned, there was one general who I take my hats off to, General Sagat Singh, who stood up there and who had got tired of these tepid responses, as his staff officer, General Randir, has written in an article of New Delhi, where don't upset the Chinese, don't confront them. Beyond the point, he cut off his phone lines for his higher commanders in New Delhi, and he took the situation head on. And believe me, the Chinese went quiet for 20 years, till they again tried to do an intrusion in 1986-87 in Sumdrongchu, when General Malik's predecessor, General Sundarji, did that famous encirclement of the Chinese. And when asked by Rajiv Gandhi what he had done, this is on the internet, so I'm not telling you some state secret. He said, I've done what is my military responsibility, Prime Minister. Now you kindly take the decision, that is your responsibility. And when Rajiv Gandhi went to Beijing in 1988, he was treated with respect by the Chinese administration and regime, because they realize he's heading a country that can respond. And today, China sees that the Western leadership is in a disarray. They're too busy trying to fight the COVID menace at home, and China always takes advantage of a global crisis. They attacked us in 1962 in the heart of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So don't let your guard down, is the point I'm making. And on a lighter note, let me tell Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, yes, there are generals like the famous General Malik who's on our show, but I'm no armchair general, because I was neither a general, neither am I armchairist completely. I spent enough time in the army and twice the time studying the Chinese, so I know what I'm talking about.
I was referring to myself as an armchair general, don't you worry.
Yes, yes. I was just going to say that, yes, Maroof. So that was the clarification there. But to the general who is on this panel, General VP Malik, the last word to you before we wrap this up. Go ahead, please.
Tanvi, firstly, I think all of us are agreed on this fact that we have to remain strong on the ground. As far as Chinese confrontation on the ground is concerned, we must be very strong, and we should also be prepared for the proactive defense posture all the time. If push comes to shove, well, we have to go in for a war, so be it. The other thing that I want to say is that in whatever negotiations take place, having learned the lessons that Maroof has just now narrated of 1967, 1986, 87, and thereafter also, I do believe that all our delegations and the ministers who negotiate now with China, they must have military representatives. I somehow have, I mean, again, being a student of military history, I do feel that sometimes lack of military knowledge, it weighs heavily on us, and therefore, when the negotiations take place, whether it is at senior diplomatic level or at political level, we must have military advice available to us on the spot, so that we don't take any wrong decisions there.
Yeah.
And that is what I have been, in fact, tweeting also, that although our defense minister met the defense minister of China recently, it was quite noticeable that there were no military officers from our side on our delegation. So I hope in future, whether it is foreign minister or the prime minister, wherever they meet, they do have military advice available to them readily.
Very good point.
I think that's a very valid point that you've raised. Perhaps something that our diplomats and our governments must look into. Well, I am completely out of time, so I'm going to thank all of our panelists for joining us. We wait and watch what happens in that big meeting that is slated. If it happens, what is the conversation between our foreign minister and his Chinese counterpart? Suffice to say, viewers, we were hoping rather that in 5 to 6 months the situation would ease off, would come back to normal between India and China, that the build-up that we saw in the month of May and the ugly clash that we saw in the month of June would be the worst that we've seen, and from there on there would be disengagement. That's not happened. Every time we've held talks with China, we've seen that they have come on board to talk to us. They have agreed to disengage, to withdraw. They do to a certain extent, and then they provoke us again. Different zones, different parts, different sectors, all along the eastern sector, mostly in Ladakh. That's where the problem has been this time. And the build-up of forces is so much now on both sides that the tension really won't be so difficult to be rid of. And that's what we are looking at right now. Where do we go from here on? It all depends on the next big conversation lined up between the leaders of the two countries, the two ministers who meet in 2 days from here. I don't, and I will never sit and advocate war between two countries. Definitely not at a point of time where we're dealing with a pandemic and our economy has contracted 24%. But China must be sent a strong message, diplomatically, militarily, or economically. Whatever has to be done, we need to figure out how we are going to resolve this. The standoff has gone on for 5 whole months. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.